Welcome to today's Explainer. We're doing something a little bit different this time. We aren't just looking at data or charts, we're stepping right over the threshold into a haunted house of philosophy. I want you to imagine me today not just as your host, but as a spectral captive, welcoming you into a very dark, very brooding intellectual space. We're going to explore the sanctuary of stagnation, which is this profound, grim, Gothic fable steeped heavily in Nietzschean philosophy. It's a story about the absolute, terrifying nature of freedom, and the desperate, often destructive things the human spirit will do just to avoid staring into the void.
Listen to this for a second. Read it like it's a panel straight out of a dark, graphic novel. I look upon the preacher of resentment, and I see the architect of my own chains, the one who taught me that the iron was not a cage, but a spine. This introduces us right away to a central figure in our fable, the preacher of resentment. This guy is the faithful servant of gravity, and what he does is both masterful and terrifying. He takes the dizzying horror of having absolute free choice, and he twists it into a religion of rigidity. While you might dream of ascending to new heights, the speaker here shares this perverse peace with the preacher, choosing to lovingly polish the remnants of their former subjugation until they're the only jewels they can even recognize in this lawless void.
Okay, let's dive into this specific term, treating it almost like a cursed rune, grausame and bindung. It roughly translates to horrific untying. You see, the preacher of resentment frames liberation not as this joyful freeing of the human spirit, but as this horrific untying. It's a liberation that offers absolutely nothing but a vacuum without memory. Just think about that. We're always told freedom is the ultimate goal, right? But the philosophy here argues that without a master to define us, we are merely wisps of smoke caught up in a predatory wind. To be untied is just being cast into the abyss.
So how exactly does a living, breathing person with a vital will to power transition into a phantom, a spectral captive? Well, the text lays out these tragic psychological steps. First, you smother the verdant spark of your own autonomy. You put it out. Second, and this is truly a perverse religious act, you lovingly polish the shackles. You polish the remnants of your subjugation just to feel safe in the void. And finally, you embrace the anchor. You trade the vitality of life for the comfort of rigidity, because you'd rather be a phantom in a familiar ruin than a living person in an existential void that has absolutely no use for your name.
Section 1. The Illusion of Rebellion. We have to journey a bit deeper into this grimoire now and take a look at those who actually tried to fight the existential void, but ultimately failed. Here we get a fascinating contrast between two parables. On one side, we have the parable of the frozen will, featuring the hero Siegfried. Siegfried takes the path of active rebellion. He physically shatters the anvil, declaring his independence from the gods, screaming his will to power out into the winter. But on the other side, you have the parable of the empty altar, featuring a passive weaver and a priest. They spend their entire lives tending a flame for a god they've never seen. And when their temple roof finally collapses, revealing the existential void, they don't rebel. They passively surrender, just staring up into the absolute silence of the heavens.
And this brilliantly illustrates a terrifying point in our fable. Both the active hero practicing a marfatsi, loving his fate, and the passive servants share the exact same failure. Siegfried's active rebellion leaves him standing entirely alone in a wasteland of lethal ice. He hasn't escaped at all. He has merely authored his own blue sepulcher. The weaver and priest meanwhile become broken instruments. Their prayers finally align with the empty void. So whether you scream at the winter or stare blankly through a collapsed roof, you end up as a monument to a freedom that is literally indistinguishable from a grave.
Section 2. The Emerald Dungeon.
Now, as we turn from solitary, tragic figures to the wider collective, we have to look at what happens when the masses encounter the dizzying horror of absolute autonomy. When everyday travelers discover that verdant spark of freedom, they don't celebrate it. They're completely paralyzed by it. The text describes how they literally smother that flame so they can build a cage. They become the voluntary herd. They view the fluid nature of life, the very act of becoming, as a corruption. So what do? They trade their individual souls for the warmth of a shared delusion. They actively beg to be bound together in what the text calls an emerald dungeon, doing whatever it takes to avoid the predatory fluidity of an undefined life.
But that leads us to a profound, chilling crossroad. I really want you to think about this. What becomes of the soul when all illusions are finally dead? When the temple has fallen, when the herd's delusion is shattered, what is the most extreme, terrifying manifestation of this philosophy.
Let's move to part 3 and see how this builds. The Starfinder's eternal petrification. Let's look at the philological breakdown of this word with a bit of grim fascination. Star means stone still. The Starfinder, or the Staraphanto, represents an existence of voluntary petrification. This is a being, the nomad of the obsidian eye, who has evolved entirely past human empathy. He has stepped into a state of total cosmic isolation. He adjusts his rings to gaze at the heavens, but not to find life. No, he only observes that which is star, stone still and dying.
By tracking the death of old illusions across the infinite dark, the Starfinder becomes a monument to eternal petrification himself. He is the ultimate linguistic manifestation of a soul that has achieved a living death. He's just a phantom, tracking fragments across the galaxies, finding peace only in the absolute stagnation of the dead stars he watches.
So, the crucial point is, Part 4, the Sanctuary of Stagnation.
How do all these parables tie together to explain why the spirit of negation is so incredibly seductive? Look at this. It's basically a morbid ledger of doomed souls. Whether it is the priest surrendering, Siegfried rebelling, the herd choosing delusion, or the Starfinder observing in total isolation, their destinations are all ultimately the same: the existential void, the blue sepulchre, the emerald dungeon, cosmic isolation. Active or passive, singular or collective, every single subject realizes that to move, to choose, is to suffer the horrific untying of a world with absolutely no grand design.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the psychology behind these choices. For these figures, saying no is the only honest answer to a reality that cannot satisfy the human spirit. They all actively choose the spirit of gravity. Why? Because gravity pulls you down. It makes existence predictable. It grants a sanctuary of stagnation against the vacuum of space. By seeking this voluntary petrification, they are shielding their spirits from the death of God and the sheer terror of absolute freedom. But in doing so, they become phantoms haunting their own ruins, proving that stagnation is, at its core, a form of spiritual expiration.
I'm going to leave you with this thought. If stagnation is our final sanctuary against the vacuum, is the weight of the anchor our only true mercy, or just the stagnant peace of the dead? It's a haunting question, isn't it? It asks us to reflect on whether our own search for comfort and safety, our own need for predictable routines, is actually just us sitting next to the preacher of resentment, lovingly polishing our own shackles. Think about that the next time you crave the safety of the known. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.